Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 3 of our story tonight. I love how the stories progress and we get into the heart of a story, and certainly part 3 is getting into the heart of the story. We're about to learn what is going on with Lara Knoxville. Somebody's got it in for her, but they've had it for all the residents of number 5 in the Patchouli house that once belonged to a ship's captain in the 1920s. And something very bizarre is going on, and Lara Knoxville is being haunted, but she's not being haunted by your traditional ghost from the past. She's being haunted by somebody who is very much alive, and we've got to find out who this person is and how in any way Bigfoot is involved in this mystery. And let's get started with part 3 of our story tonight. Errol's account. When I returned home from playing a jolly good game of bridge with some local friends of mine, my wife informed me about her long chat she'd had with a new resident in our street, a lovely young lady called Lara Knoxville, who had moved into apartment number 5 at the Patchouli residence about 3 months prior. She told my wife about all the strange, idiosyncratic, rather absurd things that had been happening to her of late. It would seem when she picked up a parcel from my wife, she had broken down in tears, poured out her heart to my wife, possibly relieved to have found someone who she could confide in, that rather reminded her of her late grandmother in Albuquerque. "It was too dreadful, Errol," she told me. "The poor woman, I can't imagine the grief she's going through. She was so overwrought. She and her husband have moved here from Albuquerque, New Mexico. They are new to Kentucky and were very excited about moving into apartment number 5. Then all these dreadful things keep happening to them. Like I suspected they happened to the Simpsons as well. Lara felt as if she was the target of a vicious hoaxer that is trying to scare the couple away from their apartment. Who is being like this? It boggles the mind that people can behave like this. She doesn't know what to do about it. The police are not taking her reports seriously at all. They think she's pulling these hoaxes herself to gain attention. The poor woman, oh Errol, she was beside herself. She believes someone is physically getting into her apartment, doing these dreadful things to her, but she has no idea of comprehending how on earth they're getting in there. When she returns home from a trip to the shops, she has a profound sense that someone has been in her apartment. It feels disturbed, if you know what I mean." "That's dreadful. I can't imagine." "It's worse than that, Errol. Things have gone missing, including, I believe, a very special photograph album that she treasures a great deal. And if that's not bad enough, dead rats have been placed into her underwear drawer from time to time. She's changed the locks over 3 times. Then, of course, she's been subjected to all those hoax call-outs, what with the fire brigade and the police, and she never called them out in the first place. If you recall, the very same things happened to the poor Simpsons, which is why I suspect they sold in a hurry. She tells me these professional people are less than amused to be toyed with like this. Who can blame them, Errol? The emergency services are needed in real-life emergency situations to save lives, not to be called out to residences when nothing is amiss and no one is in trouble." "That is not good," I agreed. "It sounds like someone's been trying to turf out the people from apartment number 5 by scaring them away over the last 2 years. I mean, who the hell would be doing this? And more to the point, why? I have no idea, love. But since you love putting your nose into other people's business, if you don't mind my saying so, and watching the coming and goings of the street, well, I thought maybe you could look into this. Find out who's living in the other apartments. Do some background checks on those people. That sort of thing. I'd like you to help Lara Knoxville if you can. She's such a lovely young lady. She doesn't deserve any of this. I feel so desperately sorry for her grievous situation. She looked like a frightened little sparrow. She's a slight-looking thing, you know, with huge big blue eyes and blonde hair. And she's not handling any of this well. Her husband's out on business most of the day, when a lot of this weird stuff is happening to her. So he doesn't understand what she's going through. I suspect he thinks it's all in her head. When my wife told me about this, I was most unsettled. I began to do some investigating, beyond just watching the patchouli residence through the lens of my binoculars. I had a hunch that the perpetrator of these nasty pranks had to be one of the occupants of the patchouli residence. One evening, on an impulsive whim, I took it upon myself to knock on all the apartments in that residence, in the guise that I was thinking of suggesting to the council that a couple of speed bumps should be erected in our road to slow down any fast cars driving in our neighbourhood. So it would give me an insight into who the residents were that lived in the patchouli residence, and whether I thought any of them might be capable of pulling these nasty stunts on the Knoxvilles, as they had done to all the couples living in apartment number 5. The first apartment I visited was on the ground floor. There were apartments on the ground floor from 1 to 3. Apartment number 1 was owned by an elderly couple, whom had lived there for over 30 years, so I knew they could not be responsible for the strange shenanigans that were going on. The problems had only started in the last couple of years or so. I knew them well enough. They were well liked by the community. Mrs. Ball had been a nurse for many long years, before she finally retired. Her husband was a skilled retired pediatric surgeon. They were keen about installing a speed bump on our street, as having worked in a hospital, both were privy to how tragic accidents could easily occur as a result of a speeding car, even in a quiet neighbourhood like Sunnyvale Close. "Oh, Mr. Spicer, that is a wonderful idea," said Mrs. Ball enthusiastically. "I think there should be speed bumps on all the roads in residential neighbourhoods. It goes with the territory. I mean, there are kids and pets running around. People need to be mindful of driving with due care. The other day, Mr. Spicer, it was just too terrible for words. I mean, this young man was speeding down the road so dreadfully fast when there were children playing out on the street on their bicycles. Luckily, they got out of the way in time. But it scared me half to death. Things could have turned out so differently. The driver was going at an outrageous speed. He looked as if he was a teenager himself, going on a joyride. I'm happy to sign for these speed bumps you're talking about. I think it's a jolly good idea, Mr. Spicer. Good on you. Is this your initiative?" she asked me. "Yes, it is," I said. "I'm going to present the idea to the council. I think they need to do something urgently about this as a protective measure for the safety of our children. People have been concerned about this issue for quite some time now. We may live in a rural neighbourhood, but you're always going to get that person who chooses to drive too fast and has no respect for driving safely in our neck of the woods." Apartment number 2 was owned by a very cagey, circumspect young man called Taylor. Taylor Sulskin, I believe his name was. He looked to be about 25 years old. He was wearing a sweater and a pair of trendy jeans. His wispy brown spiked hair stood up like a hedgehog. He had a few pimples on his chin. He opened the door very cautiously, keeping the chain locked from the inside, while he peered at me gingerly through the crack. He was guarded and standoffish, his manner brusque. "What do you want?" he snapped, looking at me suspiciously. "You're not the police, are you?" he asked. He rolled his brown eyes at the back of his head in exasperation. "Did Ron send you? Did he send you? It's so typical of him. He's always had it in for me. He's jealous because I dated his ex-girlfriend. That's what this is all about. It's so typical. He couldn't handle it, so that's why he called you to get his back on me. I knew he'd do something like this. He's such a jerk." "All right, I'll admit it," he said, raising his hand in the air. "I do sometimes smoke marijuana, but it's for medicinal purposes. I injured my back in a skiing accident once. You can check it with my doctor if you don't believe me. I had numerous surgeries on my back. The weed helps me with the pain. I hope you're not going to arrest me for that, because that would be ridiculous. Haven't you plainclothes detectives got better things to do with your time than worry about someone that's smoking weed? I mean, that's ridiculous, is it not?" "I'm not the police," I assured the young man, who could not hide the relief from his face. "I'm just wondering if I can have a minute of your time to talk to you about the possibility of putting a couple of speed bumps in the road here. It's come to my attention that some people drive too fast down the road in our neighborhood on this quiet street of ours. It might be safer to get some speed bumps erected to discourage this bad behavior of fast driving, for the safety and consideration of the children and pets in our neighborhood." "Really?" said the young man, raising a dark, cynical brow. "You came here to ask me that? I don't give a damn if they put speed bumps in the road or not. I don't have children, nor animals. None of this concerns me. People shouldn't let their kids play in the streets anyway. If their kid gets run over by a car, they're responsible. Now please go away," he said, lifting up his hand and practically shooing me away from the apartment. The man smelled strongly of weed, seemed to be very evasive. Could he be the one causing Lara Knoxville so many problems? I did not think so. He seemed too selfishly caught up in his own self-centered bubble to care about anybody else for that matter. I secretly suspected he'd far rather be enjoying smoking some pot than stuffing rotten fish into a cushion cover and sewing it up to smoke Lara Knoxville out of her apartment with an odious foul smell. Somehow it wasn't him. There was a young couple in apartment number 3, a 28-year-old woman with a newly born infant and her husband. When she answered the door, she looked absolutely exhausted. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was dishevelled and all over the place. "Do come in," she gestured to me. "Please excuse my appearance. I'm a first-time mother, and I'm just hardly holding it together, actually." Her husband was wearing a business suit and looked as if he'd just walked through the door. He greeted me with a strong, friendly but brisk handshake. The apartment, although it had the potential to be stunningly beautiful, was a bomb site, with mess strewn absolutely everywhere, as if there'd been a jumble sale taking place in the apartment. I noticed dishes in the kitchen sink, piling up, begging to be washed. The place was rather untidy. "Oh," said the woman, following my gaze, as unfortunately my focus was on the coffee table, with its long line of empty pizza boxes and dirty plates that had not been cleared away, and frankly looked as if they'd been there for a number of days. There was a stale, rather musty smell in the apartment. "I'm so embarrassed about this," she said obsequiously. "I just haven't managed to get anything done around here. I'm considering hiring a cleaner. I'm barely managing to hold it together. Who knew being a mother would be this hard? There are not enough hours in the day to get things done." "Yes, I do apologize," said the husband. "It's been tough on my wife. with a crying baby. If I had known we were expecting company, I'd have cleaned up myself. But after a long day at the office, with deadlines to meet, the last thing I felt like doing was cleaning up. You don't need to apologize to me, I told him. I had 2 kids of my own once. One of them had colic, and me and my wife were permanently exhausted. The wee little thing kept us awake all hours of the night. So we were not always looking our best, neither was the apartment. But it goes with the territory of having children. If it's any consolation, it will get better and easier. I seem to remember you develop a fitness with children, as with any other kind of sport you indulge in. So believe me, it's not going to be a nightmare indefinitely.
Oh, that is so kind of you to say that, said the woman. No one tells you how hard it is to be a first-time mother. First-time parents, actually. Me and my husband were not intending to have children, but it just happened.
We don't regret it for 1 minute, said the husband hurriedly. It's the best thing that has ever happened to us. Having a baby, I mean. Even if it is a little overwhelming. Sorry, can I get you a drink or something? I've almost forgotten to mind my manners. It's been one of those days, I'm afraid. No, that's very kind of you, I said. But I'm only popping around to ask you how you might feel about the possibility of putting a speed bump, a couple of them, in the road, to make it safer for our children and pets.
Well, you can count on us, said the woman eagerly, looking to her husband for moral support. I think it's a fabulous idea.
I do too, he agreed. I will sign on the dotted line at once. I want our street to be safe for our children to play around. If we can slow down some of those maniac drivers, that will make things even better around here, for the folk living here. It's crazy that in such a peaceful neighbourhood, in a countrified setting, that this even goes on. But now and again, someone drives down our road as if they're Nigel Mansell on steroids. I think something should be done about this, so you can count on our support. As I bid them both farewell, I could hear the loud cries of a baby. My heart went out to the poor couple. They certainly had their hands full.
Oh dear, said the woman. There she goes again. When will she ever stop? There is no rest for the wicked.
I knew there was no way they were involved in bothering Lara Knoxville. They had far too much on their plates to concern themselves with playing pranks. Mr. Chris Harper was a man in his 50s. Now he lived in apartment number 3. I knew him well enough, of course. Everyone in the neighbourhood certainly did. He was well liked, but he is what you would describe as an adrenaline junkie, with a great big passion for adventure. He owned a Harley Davidson and took long road trips around America with his biker friends. I noticed he always was heavily tattooed and had lots of piercings in his ears. He invited me in for a beer, slapping me on the back, and said, "It's good to see you, Errol. Long time no see. The last time I saw you was at the neighbourhood barbecue. That must have been about 6 months ago. I've not been around, I'm afraid. I've been out on the open road for 3 months now, but I'm back for a week or so, and then I'm gone again. You can't keep a good man like myself down, can you?" he said, giving me a wink. "I feel so free out there, you know, on the open road with a powerful engine beneath me, the wind blowing against my cheeks. On my recent trip, I went riding by fields and fields of corn, under a golden sky. Oh, my goodness, it was beautiful. There was nothing quite like it. When I was growing up, I loved nothing better than watching corn grow. There's nothing quite like it, you know. I left Chris Harper's apartment 2 hours later, with a couple of beers lining my gut. He told me about his long trips out on the open road. I was struck with the incredulous feeling that Chris Harper's life was one big adventure, and he was not the sort of man that would be interested in playing silly pranks on a young couple. Furthermore, he was always away. He wouldn't have been able to do some of those things. When I knocked on apartment number 4, a woman in her 30s answered the door. Maybe her late 20s, I couldn't be sure. Age has never been a good thing with me. I can never tell how old a woman is. I'd seen her around before, and me and my wife had kept a parcel for her on a couple of occasions. Her name was Stacy Turner, and as far as I knew, she'd never been married. I believe she worked as a receptionist for a Japanese car supplier. She was wearing a pink dressing gown and matching slippers. She looked like your quintessential girl next door. She opened the door very curiously, peering at me through the open crack, rather nervously. I realized with a small measure of embarrassment that maybe I shouldn't have called on the young lady. Perhaps it was getting late. I mean, one glance at my watch told me it was close to 8:30. I had spent so long with Chris Harper, enjoying a couple of beers, that I guess I got carried away with the time. "How can I help you?" she asked me. She looked me up and down. Then recognition dawned in her eyes. "Oh, I know who you are. You're Mr. Spicer, aren't you? You look after my parcels from time to time. You live in that lovely 1920s house over the road. I've seen you walk your two big dogs in the woods. Do you want to come in?" "That's most kind of you," I said. "But I'll only be a minute of your time. I do apologize. I had no idea it was getting too late. Chris Harper invited me in for a drink. You know, the one that rides a Harley Davidson around America. I guess I got carried away with time. Oh, he had some adventures to tell me about. Quite eye-opening they were." "That doesn't surprise me at all," said the young lady. "Chris Harper can talk the knickers off a nun, can't he? That man would make a parrot have a personality complex. Now do please come in." Stacy led me into her living room. It smelt of burnt incense. It was decorated in a bright Moroccan colour scheme. There were Buddhas displayed around the room, and dream catchers hanging across the ceiling, and interesting-looking artworks of Egyptian goddesses, which made me wonder if Stacy was a spiritual person, maybe someone into Wicca or something like that. I couldn't be sure. "This is interesting," I said. "Your decor, I mean. I've not seen anything like it. Unless, of course, you go into some of those spiritual shops on the street. I see things like that there, you know, crystals and tarot cards and stuff like that." "I know. I'm interested in all that stuff. Can I get you a drink, Mr. Spicer?" she asked me. "I do have peach iced tea on offer in the refrigerator, if that would interest you. It's incredibly refreshing. I get through litres and litres of the stuff in the summer. I confess it's all I ever drink. I hate water, you see. I can't stand the stuff. You should see my shopping cart. Half the stuff I ever buy is peach iced tea." "No, I must be going. Kind of you to offer, though. But I need to make this quick. How would you feel if we were to put speed bumps in the main road down our street?" "Whatever for?" asked Stacy, looking surprised. "This is a quiet rural neighbourhood. Why would we need bumps in the road? It's not like we're living in a busy town, is it? I mean, is that really necessary? Isn't that overkill?" "Well, there are times when children are playing in the road. And you do get the odd driver that has a fixation on accelerating. It would mean that people would be forced to slow down. It's more a protective measure, should I say, to stop anyone from speeding." "As far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely disgusting to speed in a residential area. Anyone who does that deserves to be locked up. You can count on my support, Mr. Spicer." I thought Stacy Turner seemed nice enough. I didn't think she'd be inclined to pull stunts on her neighbours. But she had been living in the apartment for 2 years, which was in the timeline, when all the strange activity occurred. To apartment number 5, which was right next to her. Her immediate neighbours, so to speak. By all accounts, she lived alone. She was out of the day, working most of the time at the car dealership. I didn't think she'd have the time to pull off these stunts. The next apartment to Stacy Turner's was the Knoxville apartment, and the one to the right was apartment number 6, which I knew belonged to Lizelle Newman, who lived and breathed horses. I knew she wouldn't mind me calling on her late. I'd seen her trotting down the street on her black and bay American horse, which she boarded at a nearby horse farm, where she worked as a groom, and a very good one at that, I believe. When she invited me into her apartment, it smelt of leather and tack. In the flagstone entrance hall, on the hooks on the wall, were a long line of riding hats in different states of condition. Then beneath the hooks on a very grand, rather ornate wrought-iron shoe-stand, were half a dozen very stunning-looking leather riding boots, highly polished, stood together in a neat row. I observed a magnificent leather saddle, lying splayed across an ornate walnut stool, like a piece of artwork. It was, I hasten to say, the most magnificent saddle I have ever beheld. That Lizelle told me had once belonged to her late father, who I believe was a masterful rider at one time. The walls were covered in stunning selections of artworks, all depicting horses running across alpine fields, with the wind wildly blowing against their manes. Then on one wall were hundreds of framed photographs of Lizelle herself, jumping over impressive-looking jumps and smiling broadly into the camera. I observed on the hall table the most exquisite marble statue of a horse, standing up on its hind legs, and I knew this apartment belonged to a horse-obsessed person. I doubt Lizelle would have been remotely interested in playing any nasty tricks on the Knoxvilles. This woman was caught up in the world of horses, and nothing else interested her. When Lizelle opened the door to me, she was still wearing cream jodhpurs and a white cotton shirt. Lizelle led me eagerly into her rather grandiose living room. There was a glass of red wine on the walnut coffee table, along with an open bottle of red wine of a very illustrious vintage. The woman clearly had expensive taste in wine. There was a book that was lying open on the settee, cover side up. It was about the life and times of some famous horse rider that I've never heard of before, which I suspect she must have been reading before she actually answered the door to me. There was opera music playing in the background on a rather elaborate-looking Bang & Olufsen musical centre. So Lizelle didn't buy anything cheap. To her credit, there was a real fire frolicking away merrily in the grate, not one of these fake fireplaces made to look like a fire. I like more natural sources of heating myself, so her living room was toasty warm, very inviting. "I'm very sorry to call on you so late," I told her. "I lost track of the time, but I needed to talk to all the residents about an idea I have concerning the neighbourhood, and I wanted to get your feedback on the matter." "Don't you dare apologize to me, Mr. Spicer. I won't have that," she said, waving her arm in the air coquettishly. She began to giggle. She was slightly tipsy, I suspect. With an arm flung around my back, she guided me into a gold and red-striped wing chair, persuading me to take a seat. "What a lovely surprise this is, Errol, to have you pop up like this so unexpectedly. I was only thinking it would be lovely to have company this evening, and here you are, like a granted wish. I didn't even have to rub Aladdin's magic lamp to get the company I was seeking. How about you join me with a lovely glass of wine? It's an excellent vintage. You will not be disappointed, and I would so appreciate the company." How could I refuse the woman, especially when the wine was delicious? The company even better. Lizelle had a great sense of humour. Before long we were chatting away, and the conversations were all about her life spent with horses, and the curious question as to why she had never married. I mean, I very nearly did tie the knot, you know, Errol, with a very lovely man called Michael, but in the end we split up. He told me that I was far too passionate about horses, that they were consuming my life, and that I'd be better off married to one. I realized he was absolutely right, you know," said Lizelle, laughing, as she took a sip of her wine. "I've always preferred horses to people, Errol," she admitted. "I could legally marry a horse if given the chance," she said with a naughty twinkle in her eyes. She waved her finger at me teasingly. "Now let's see. There is a very hunky stallion on our horse farm. Now that horse, he is a looker, and he's got a killer mane on him, let me tell you, Errol." At that we both burst out laughing. I called my wife to tell her that I would be back later. And 4 hours later I was feeling very tiddly, as Lizelle had ploughed me with glasses of delicious red wine that I could not refuse. I had knocked back a couple of beers with Chris earlier on in the evening, so I'd had my fill of alcohol, that was for sure. Yet I wasn't sure I was any closer to finding out who was perpetrating these rather mysterious, malicious stunts on the Knoxvilles. I left Lizelle's apartment, realizing to my astonishment that I hadn't even broached the subject of speed bumps with her. But I left feeling fully satisfied that Lizelle would have nothing to do with upsetting the Knoxvilles. She was far too wrapped up in the world of horses. "Thanks for coming, Mr. Spicer," she said, giving me a toothy grin, and I realized Lizelle's teeth were like that of a horse. "We've got to do this again," she chuckled. "It was so much fun." As I made my way out of the arched entrance of the Patchouli residence, I went down a flight of sandstone steps into a courtyard. I shivered because it was freezing cold out there, and I was only wearing a lightweight jacket. It was a moonlit night, with a soft moon peeking through the velvety dark sky, like a bashfully shy child peering through the dark curtains of a theatre. My legs were wobbling beneath me, as I hobbled rather awkwardly away from Lizelle's residence, wondering if I had overdone things by drinking too much. Silly question. Of course I had. The wine seemed to have made me very unsteady on my feet. I was about to walk away from the Patchouli residence to cross the road to my own home, when I heard a clanging and clattering sound. I knew it was coming from the bins on the Patchouli property. Who was making that noise, I wondered? Surely the raccoons would have gone into early hibernation by now. The weather had been freezing cold of late, so it couldn't be raccoons ferreting around in the bins, I was most sure. I could have walked away, of course, but as my wife will tell you, I'm naturally nosy by nature. If I went home and ignored the crashing sounds, it would niggle me greatly that I hadn't investigated what was going on. I like to get my nose into everything. There was not a soul outside. It was eerily quiet, hauntingly so, you could say, as all the lights in the residential houses in our neck of the woods were out, even my own. The residents in Sunnyvale Close had wisely all decided to retire to bed, given it was a weeknight. We didn't have any street lights in the close, so it was rather dark. I pulled out my cell phone from my pocket to light up my path with the torch. I heard the crashing sound again, and my insatiable curiosity was naturally piqued. I didn't want to frighten anything away, so I clandestinely, very discreetly made my way towards the bins, being absolutely sure not to make any noise, even though in my drunken state I was ungainly on my feet. It was difficult to even walk in a straight line, let alone walk with a measure of stealthy caution. When you're under the influence, but I tried my level best, I did. The noise got increasingly loud as I approached the bins. They were placed in a little square-walled area, behind a neatly manicured hedge to hide them from the road, so that they couldn't be visibly observed from the street. I approached the bins, keeping myself in shadow, and that was when I saw stuff flying out of the bins. Someone was standing there, rummaging around in the bin, with a frantic urgency. They were making a grunting sound. My first thought was, what the hell is that? My vision was very blurry. I was so inebriated. I began to rub my eyes vigorously, in the rather vain hope that it might make me see better. I observed large boxes of peached iced tea crash-landing on the ground. There were so many of them. I realized that this someone was ferreting in Stacy Turner's bin, because she had told me that she drank tons of peached iced tea. This had to be her bin. That was when I saw him, and that was when I thought I had to be dreaming. The wine really must have gone straight to my head. There was no way that what I was seeing could possibly be real. I rubbed my eyes again. I had to do it to make sure that I was awake. But there was no doubt that what I was seeing was unmistakably real. The moonlight unabashedly cast its pearly luminescence, its gossamer lighting effects over this creature. Even though I could only see his burly proportions, his ponderous shoulders, his overlong arms, and the back of his pyramid-shaped head, I was in no doubt that I was seeing a Bigfoot. The size of this humongous creature was incredible. There are no words. He must have been 9 foot tall, his stature robust, burly, powerful. I was thrown off guard. I had not expected to stumble across a Bigfoot going through the rubbish like this, and his hunt through Stacy Turner's bin was driven by focused purpose, as if he was looking for something in particular. What was he doing, I wondered? Then I heard a faint mewing sound, like that of a cat. The Bigfoot pulled out the plastic bag that was knotted at the top, opened it out, and gently pulled out something furry. It sprang into life and hurried past me at breakthrough speed, and I realized at once it was Casper, Mrs. Thomas's cat. The woman had put up posters around the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen her beloved cat. Someone vindictively spiteful had done this. The Bigfoot had saved the cat's life. It was then, in that poignant moment, I wondered about the sanity of Stacy Turner, as the cat had been found in her bin. The Bigfoot closed the bin's lid with a mighty walloping crash, leaving Stacy's trash lying around the place like fallen autumn leaves. The Bigfoot must have sensed my presence. Very suddenly his head swiveled around in my direction. His eyes met mine. They gave off a yellow eye shine. I was too inebriated to run away, so I stood there, gawking foolishly at the creature. The Bigfoot stood there looking bewildered to see me. I know this sounds awfully strange, but he looked right through me, as if he was reading me like a book, from its beginning to its very end. No one has ever looked at me like that before or since, I'm glad to say, because it was disturbingly uncomfortable. It was almost as if he could see right through to my soul. The Bigfoot lifted up 5 fingers. I heard in my head the words, 5 cats. I've had to rescue 5 cats from this bin. Someone is trying to harm them, just for the fun of it. The Bigfoot shook his head in disgust. No animal should be thrown away like this, discarded. It's wrong. It's very wrong. Anything that is killed for food should always be honoured with great thanks for its incredible sacrifice. I never eat anything myself that I kill without giving thanks first to the animal for what he gave up for me. I wondered to myself how it was possible that this Bigfoot had spoken to me in my head. This kind of telepathic exchange I had certainly never experienced before. It was insanely bizarre, I thought. But I know, even in my bladdered condition, I did not imagine those words. They were more real to me than some of the conversations I've had with people over the years. I was thinking this when the Bigfoot responded, "Yes, I spoke to you. Get over it." I stared at the creature incredulously, and I sensed he was highly intelligent. He had extrasensory abilities, that's for sure. Once again he spoke, shaking his head. "It's good you don't see what I see sometimes," he muttered. "Believe me, not everything I see is good. Which is maybe why your kind so successfully block it all away. But whoever is doing this to these animals is not right in the head." The Bigfoot nodded at me politely, gliding away, swinging his arms backwards and forwards, and never looking back once. He moved with such a grace until he vanished from my sight, and once again I rubbed my eyes. Did that just happen? I was completely confounded, wondering if the drink had gone straight to my head. The red wine was seriously good stuff. I knew, of course, I was not hallucinating. I had indeed encountered a Bigfoot that had communicated with me telepathically. I have no idea how he knew Mrs. Thomas's black and white cat had been thrown into the rubbish like this. Had Stacy Turner done this, I wondered? If that was the case, she was sick in the head, and if she was capable of doing such a wicked thing like this, she was certainly capable of upsetting Lara Knoxville. I hurriedly picked up all the cartons of peached iced tea to return them into Stacy's bin, and that was when I found the photograph album. Who would throw out a perfectly good photo album like this? I sifted rather curiously through the photographs. I realized they were pictures of the Knoxvilles. Hadn't my wife told me that Lara Knoxville was missing a photograph album? And here it was, in Stacy Turner's bin. I knew now unequivocally that in some way Stacy Turner was the woman that was trying to ruin Lara Knoxville's life. I had two questions. How was Stacy Turner getting into her apartment? And why was she doing these horrible things to her next-door neighbour? And what was this cruelty to animals all about? The owners probably had no idea that their cats were being thrust into plastic bags to be suffocated to death, as a Bigfoot had been determined to save their lives, and had set them free. So the owners were none the wiser to this. I needed to get to the bottom of this enigmatic mystery, and find out about the wolf in sheep's clothing that Stacy Turner clearly was. So there we are. It's getting very, very exciting. We're certainly reaching ahead with this story, and I look forward to you joining me tomorrow night for our final part of the story. Until then, goodbye and good night.